Hi, you're listening to the Build Your Digital Community podcast. I'm your host, Christina Bartold, the co-founder and co-CEO of The Social Snippet, a social media agency focused on business owners growing their digital communities. On this podcast, we'll talk about all things digital community building so that you can grow your network and ultimately your business. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Build Your Digital Community. This one is a special one, but I feel like I say that about all of them. I feel like every single one has had its own flair. But I've been podcasting for just over a year now, at least with this podcast. And this is my 100th episode. And why I am so excited about this episode, and I am weeks out in terms of recording, in terms of guests. I have, guests galore backed up like in the archives for weeks to come, and they're amazing. I went to my podcasting team and I was like, I need to record a 100th episode because it's just so important to celebrate these milestones. And so this is a reminder in your business if you're like, hey, I'm experiencing something in my business, whether that's your first 100 followers on Instagram, your first sale, your first 100K, like whatever that looks like, it's great to celebrate it. And I'm definitely in the trap of always being like, oh, like, should I be public about it? Like, should I say anything? I remember when we first hit our 1,000 downloads or 2,000 downloads, I was so nervous about celebrating some of these things. But it's so important. It's so important for people to know, the things that you're doing, but also it gives people hope and people are finding possibility in what you're doing. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of my reflections over the last few months of podcasting and what has led me to this 100th episode. And when I was journaling this morning about why do I podcast? Like, why is this still something I continue to do? Because I spend multiple hours a week on it, right? And we know in business, like these are the types of things that get pushed aside. They are the types of things that often don't feel like they bring us ROI right away. And so they're easy to be put aside. It's easy to say like, okay, I'm not going to podcast this week because I've got discovery calls. I've got this, I've got that. I'm not saying don't go to discovery calls to podcast instead, but what I am saying is that it's really important to keep these habits up with things like podcasting because you're not only serving your business today, you're serving a future version of your business. And so one of the things I've been really surprised about with my podcast has been how many times people download old episodes. So someone downloads an episode that was out a year ago. And my first episode gets downloaded all the time. Like people are still coming back for episodes because something resonates with them and they're excited about learning about it. I had an episode, and all of my numbers are up, like all of them, even from the beginning. So even my podcast episodes at the beginning where they had just a few downloads, I'm talking about, even my lowest downloaded podcast episodes, they're still getting downloads. So people are still looking for the stuff, which is awesome, but don't be discouraged by early numbers if you're doing something like this. And so that is kind of the first lesson I want to talk about is one, don't be discouraged by early numbers or anything that is like, you're expecting bigger results. I'll tell you, I recently had Keisha get Mary on the show, and Keisha just celebrated, I think, 9 million downloads on her podcast. And she was like, well, I've been doing it a long time, since 2019. I think she said 2019 or 2018. And if I did the math on timesing my current downloads to backtracking 4 years, which isn't right because obviously podcasts grow over time, I would not be anywhere near 9 million, right? And initially I had fear, right? I was like, oh, is this the medium that I should be using? Do people actually listen to this? I don't know, is this worth my time? Look how well she's doing. Maybe that's her spot and I should be doing something else. But that fear, I can't let that dictate my future. And all of these things take time. They take advertising, they take learning. And so it's really about not being discouraged. If you listen to my podcast episode with Lindsay Schwartz, Lindsay mentioned she never looked at her download numbers for the first year because she was like, I just didn't want to know, right? I just didn't want to know. I knew that would get me. And so it's really important that you work with what you need. And so sometimes you really need the data, and I'll talk about that in a second. But sometimes it's about just showing up consistently and showing yourself you can do it. So that was when I went up to 2 episodes a week. I just needed to show myself I could do it. It was important to me that I could show myself that this was something I was excited about and that I was committed to, and this was something that I wanted to stay involved with. So don't be discouraged by early numbers. I remember early on, even when we started our social snippet Instagram, we had 40 followers or something like that. And I said to Maria, I was like, who's going to buy social media services from someone with 40 followers. And our following's definitely grown since then. I think we just passed like 2,500 or something like that. But I don't need, a million followers to show people the great work that we do. And so what I'm going to say is don't be discouraged by early numbers and keep on keeping on. And especially like learn from some of your mentors. Like if you've got people who are podcasters and they have some tips on how they've been able to grow their podcast, I'd really recommend going all in and learning from them. The other thing is like, don't be afraid to ask people to be on your podcast. And this one is so easy. Like this is an easy thing to say. But when I was getting started, I was so nervous about asking people. So I kept my circle really small. So at first, I just kind of asked a few people who I was friends with. And those episodes actually are some of my highest performing episodes. So because they felt really easy, it was really comfortable. I'm talking about my episode with Marina Middleton, with Steve Fleischer, with Jeanette Downey. Like those were great episodes. And Allie, like so many amazing episodes early on. But I really stuck it with people that I was close with because I was nervous. And I love those episodes. And again, like I'm about to bring all those people around for a round 2 because they're so smart. Allie and I are going to do another one in Denver. Steve and I think are recording this Friday. Like I'm bringing the people back. But what's really important for me is that I made asks that felt uncomfortable. And I got huge yeses. And it was amazing. So some of my most fun episodes I did in person. And I got to sit with a mentor who I really respected and who is somebody who I would be like really excited about chatting with. And so I made a list actually in about March. I made a list and I was like, there's 4 people I want on my podcast in the like next 5 years. And that'll make me feel like I'm going to like really go all in on my podcast. I'm really excited about these conversations. And the 4 people were Chris Harder, Lori Harder, Keisha, and Lindsay Schwartz. And I'm 75% done. And Lori and I just haven't had a chance to connect in person, but she told me that she's willing. If I was so nervous about asking, like I never would have had those opportunities, and those connections have been amazing. It got me to get to know some mentors in a way better way than I've ever gotten to. They get to see some of your magic, you get to see some of their magic, and you get to borrow their audience if they're willing to share it, which was such a gift too. Like I was so impressed. Chris's episode went live and he texted me and was like, "Don't forget to remind me when this goes live so that I can post it in my stories." And he did a link to it. Like it's my most downloaded episode. And I love that episode, but that was the first time I had ever shot my shot with somebody. And one of the things that I actually really recommend that if you're like, okay, like I'm a podcaster, like I'm nervous about it. Maybe my numbers don't reflect really like the energy of somebody that I really respect and I really want them on the show. What I would really recommend to you is try to find a way to add value back to them. And that was a compliment Lindsay gave me, was when I asked Lindsay and I asked Chris to be on the podcast, I said, I'd love to meet you in person to do this if you're open. I will cut up every single clip of you, not me, my podcasting team, Meredith, who's the best. We'll cut up all these clips of you. We will use your branding and we'll send them back to you. You don't even need to mention the podcast. Like, I don't care. Really, the value of this is like my listeners getting to hear a conversation between you and I. And every single person was like, yeah, sure, like totally, that's such a high value ask, thank you so much. We're grateful for the videos. Didn't really like it wasn't like if I don't get these videos, like I'm not coming on, but it was just like a way for me to provide more value. So I love that too, like when people make an ask of me, like whether that's like, hey, can I take you out for a coffee to talk about starting a social media agency, or I'm thinking about starting a podcast but I'm nervous about it and I'm gonna do it myself, so I'm not gonna hire you to do it, but like I'm gonna do it myself, but could we talk about it? I'm like, yeah, for sure. And often people add value back to me and it's a great energy exchange. So try to find that way too. Like if you're a podcaster or really anything that you're doing in business where you're trying to kind of learn from somebody else in a way that isn't like a paid program, I would say you want to make sure it's an equal energy exchange so that person doesn't feel taken advantage of. The other thing I'm going to say about podcasting is ask yourself like what's working. So this kind of goes against Lindsay's advice of like not looking at your numbers. And I'm kind of torn. I don't think that would have worked for me, if I'm being honest. I am numbers obsessed. I love data. And because I don't see data as bad. And that's a mindset thing. So a lot of people are like in a bit of a different headspace around that stuff, but I'm a big believer that data is just information. So when I post a reel and it bombs, I'm like, ooh, info. Like, yeah, that sucks, but info. I know people don't like that. I know my best performing stories are where I share something personal. I know that. right? And then that stuff sells. I know that, but my worst performing stories are when I'm jumping on stories and asking people to buy things from me, which is not that often. So looking at your podcast trends and seeing what works, I know my solo episodes aren't as high performing as my guest interviews. And that actually is not normal. Like a lot of people have a lot of solo interviews. And I think it's because I actually don't do a lot of value providing in terms of these solo like messages that I do. And I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way, but I'm not sitting down being like, hey, here's how you grow on social. They're usually like kind of mindset related. Maybe my audience doesn't like that. But when I did my Threads episode, where like I did it 24 hours after Threads launched, that was one of my highest downloaded episodes. And it was downloaded all in 7 days. Like I don't think there's been a new download since, but people were downloading it right away because it was timely information. So that was a great reminder to me of like, okay, when a new feature comes out, really like going ham and making it a priority to make a great episode out of it. That's what my audience wants. They want some social media news. So that's actually a priority of mine, is like, okay, looking out for new trends and talking about them, and actually getting back to some of my original like insights with this podcast, which was to be providing really timely social media information. I haven't really been doing that because I've been focusing on guest interviews, and truthfully, guest interviews are easier to do. I love them. They light me up. They're easy. I know that you guys love them, and it gets me into somebody else's world. They get into my world. Like, I love it. But what I really need to be focusing on too is providing more value. So it was a really good reminder when I looked at my numbers to be like, oh, people don't like me by myself as much. But that's okay, because I need to find ways to provide more value. And the other thing is, I love podcasting as a medium. So if you're like thinking about starting a podcast, we offer podcast management services, but this isn't a pitch for that. I think podcasting is one of the most intimate ways for you to be connecting with your audience. And it's something that is just so cool to be able to see when people connect with you directly. So for example, I did a discovery call recently, and when I jumped on, the woman was like, oh my God, it's so weird. She's probably listening to this, but she's like, it's so weird to hear you like talk to me because I listen to you all the time. And I was like, oh, that's nice. And she's like, I've listened to you like here. I found you on this podcast. I like brought me over to your podcast. That was great. And so that's a really like neat way to think about podcasting, is that you're not going to see the ROI right away unless you've got a big audience. And so, for example, like I'm not at the sponsorship part of podcasting, but something I am going to start doing, which you'll see if I haven't started yet, is I will be running small ads in my podcast, but to things I'm an affiliate for. So things I already believe in, they're not going to be partnerships. You'll see also with an event coming up that for the sponsorships we've provided, also ads. So you'll see ads start to pop up in this podcast, but I'm not at the point where I'm like, hey everyone, this is how many listens I get, come sponsor me. And so that's okay. And I don't know that I want to be there in terms of listens, but I don't know that that's what I want to be doing right now with my podcast. But what I love about podcasting is it's the most intimate form of connecting with a mentor, right? Like, other than paying one-on-one services or being one-on-one with somebody, being in their ear, like, you're in your ideal client's ear, they're listening to you, they're like building relationship with you, and you don't even know it. So I have so many people that I feel like have connected with me and talk to me all the time and are so like engaged, but at the same time, I might not know them and they're waiting to make their purchase, right? So it's really, really cool. And like, I love it as a medium. I think I'll do it for a long time. And I remember my mentor, Chris, telling me, don't do podcasting unless you can keep it up 2 or 3 years. And there are times where I'm like, this is a bit much. Like, I'm kind of over this. Last week I didn't record one podcast. And that felt a bit overwhelming later, because I was like, oh my gosh, now I need to record 80. Like, this is insane. But at the same time, I'm trying to work in the season of like ebb and flow. Like, when I'm enjoying podcasting, doing 10. And when I'm not enjoying podcasting, not doing any. So that I don't feel like I'm coming on and being like, hi guys, like, here I am again, right? So I really, really want to make sure that what I'm doing is providing a lot of value and that it feels authentic to me. And even if that means going down to 1 episode a week, like, if I got to do it, I got to do it. So these are my reflections of 100 episodes of the Build Your Digital Community podcast. And I just want to firstly say, I know I always say this, but thank you so much for listening. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, because I listen to so many podcasts every week that are like, staples in the way that I learn. And to be that for somebody else is a true gift. And I know this is just the beginning for the impact Maria and I get to make on this earth. And I can't wait to continue to make it. And I hope this podcast gets to be a part of it. So I also just want to remind you, if you listen to this, I would love for you to share it. You don't have to share it publicly if that's not for you, but just DMing me, letting me know you're listening. That's like my favorite. I love to hear that people are listening to this. Any takeaways that they have, anything that they're really excited about. I love that. And I just like really am passionate about helping you build community online. So if there's a topic that you're like, I really want to hear about this, or this is something new that's come out, can you talk about it? You know I will. So just let me know. Anyway, keep on building your digital community, and to this and more. Thanks so much for listening to the Build Your Digital Community podcast. If you loved the episode, please don't forget to rate us and leave us a review. Now, we'd love for you to be a part of our digital community. Text JOIN to 855-908-4688 to join our text list for exclusive social media tips, or DM us on Instagram at The Social Snippet, letting us know what you loved about the episode. Keep on building community, and to this and so much more.